This is the Birth, Baby, and Life podcast, and we're talking about neurodivergent birth in episode number 209. Hey mama, it is Kristen, and I am super excited to be back today to be talking more about our series on neurodivergency and pregnancy, birth, and mothering. Today we are going to talk about being neurodivergent or on the autism spectrum when you are preparing specifically for your baby's birth. Now, I am a pregnancy coach. I work with moms all over the world, helping them to have a great pregnancy and to prepare for a beautiful natural birth. And so I wanted to share that this episode is definitely going to come from the perspective of natural birth, because that's usually what I'm walking mamas through. But much of this will be applicable to you even if you're planning on a medicated birth or you're planning a cesarean or something like that. But I do want to give that little caveat that definitely we're going to be talking from a natural birth perspective. And also in this episode, as well as the next couple of episodes, I think there will be a lot there for you, even if you are not a neurodivergent mom. So you may want to stick around and listen, even if you would consider yourself neurotypical, or if you're just curious as to what a neurodivergent mom may experience, or you're curious if that might describe your experiences. So I am looking forward to talking about this with you. So let's jump in with something that we touched on a bit last week. Well, first, let's just talk about the fact that autistic women give birth, of course, and there are often challenges. There may be commonalities and challenges that autistic women really struggle with that go perhaps above and beyond what neurotypical women struggle with. Some are sensory sensitivities, and we touched on that definitely last week. There's also trouble with communication barriers, and again, this is one that I think can be really universal, especially when you're working in the medical system, whether you're neurotypical or whether you're neurodivergent. But I do think that women on the autism spectrum have more trouble. Last week I talked about some of the research that shows communication between people, and it's definitely valid that women on the spectrum may have more trouble with communicating with somebody who is not on the spectrum. And then also another thing, I didn't touch on this as much last week, but another thing that people on the autism spectrum, both men and women, often really crave this sense of control. So you might think of like people who have type A personalities or whatever, and this need to kind of be in control and in charge. And it's especially a big thing for women on the spectrum. And I think it's because life in a neurotypical world can just be really exhausting, because things that may feel intuitive to other people are hard for you, or things that are learned for other people you may continually have to think about. So like playing back the rules of interaction and social interaction and this and that to make sure that you're able to fit in and to go with that. And so there's a strong craving to be able to have a sense of control so that life isn't necessarily so exhausting all of the time. And that definitely comes through in pregnancy and birth. And in pregnancy, like we talked about last week, you can set up a lot of routines. But birth, by its very nature, can bring a lot of unexpected with it. And so that's why I think it's especially important to talk about this desire for control. And when I say control, I don't mean it in necessarily like a negative way, like she's a controlling blip, 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 right? I think that it's really something that you're trying to crave some level of consistency and normalcy in your system. And that I think is really something that should be respected and honored, and looked at how can we do that while also respecting and honoring kind of I've been doing this work for a long time. I've had 8 babies, so I can say, the adventure that pregnancy and birth brings, but it also does bring a lot of anxiety, and that's what I work with women every day on. So with that, let's jump into some things. So we talked a lot about sensory sensitivities in pregnancy, and those will definitely come into play during labor as well, particularly sound sensitivities, light sensitivities, and touch sensitivities, because those are definitely big things. Hospitals, if you're planning a hospital birth, this is really a big thing to be aware of, because hospitals are noisy places. There's a lot of sudden sounds. There's lots of other people's voices. All of those sorts of things kind of come in and can rush at you. There's beeping and people, kind of hollering one thing or another down the hall, even if it's not an emergency. And there's just a lot of stimulation going on. And then we pair that with the visual stimulation of just there's always bright lights and all that fluorescent, again, beeping, blinking, just so much is going on. There's screens everywhere. and outputs everywhere. So there's a lot of visual stimulation as well. And the lights are especially one thing that moms say can be overwhelming. And then there's touch and physical sensitivity, because care providers will come in and they'll want to touch you, and they'll want to touch you in the most intimate places that you have. And I want to, first and foremost, I want to say that you have the right to decline any medical procedure, including an exam during pregnancy. Now, we won't go into that a lot on this podcast, because I could do an entire podcast series just on that topic. But I do want to let you know that you can always say no. And even in the middle of an exam, you can say no. A magic word to remember in the hospital always is consent. If you say, I do not consent to this, that is a magic word in the hospital. You can ask, I do not consent to this. Please put it in my chart. That tends to make care providers step back, stop, and think, because if that's in your chart, that's a reason that they can get sued later on. Also, if they are in the middle of a procedure, now, if they were in the middle of, for example, doing a cesarean, you probably would not say this. But if they're in the middle of a vaginal exam, you can say, stop, I no longer consent to this. You do not have to consent, and you can ask them to withdraw. And this could be a great place to have a doula with you, because your doula could reiterate, or your birth partner could, your husband or partner could say, I think I just heard her say she doesn't consent to this. And just reiterate that. And again, can we please, they can say this on your behalf, can we please record in her chart that she said she no longer consents to this? So that's just a little bit of a rabbit trail to let you know that you do not have to consent to touch. And usually that's in relation to a vaginal exam, because they do a lot. And again, I could write volumes on this, but ultimately they're not very useful information. In most labors, there's times they're useful, but not usually, and certainly not routinely the way that they're done and used, and they can feel violating to women. But there are other things that can be going on that are sensory stimulations, such as fetal monitoring, having those belts strapped to you, being stuck in one place. You can feel trapped, and that can be very difficult. And I want to acknowledge that these are issues for moms all over the place, including moms who are not on the autism spectrum or who are not neurodivergent. But I think it really comes out for mamas who are. So how do you deal with those? Some of the things are going to be similar to what we talked about in pregnancy. Having headphones on, having your earpods in, that kind of thing, so that you can listen to music, or so that you can shut some of that noise out. Asking people to wait before they touch you, or to ask permission, or again, like I talked about a moment ago, even declining, and explaining what kind of touch is hard for you, making sure that your support person is right there with you if you do consent to touch that is difficult for you. And then for visual sensitivities, this is a great reason to ask for accommodation at the hospital, particularly with the lights in your room being low. Another thing that could help is an eye mask, but because having light levels low is altogether good for facilitating birthing, if we think about animals and how they birth, if you ever had a cat or a dog who's gone to have a litter of kittens or puppies, they usually seek a quiet, protected place in the home. And you are also a mammal, even if you are a neurodivergent mammal. And so that calm, quiet, protected, that will facilitate birthing hormones in you as well. So it's good for every pregnant mom. So having the lights low and dim is a really good thing. And even if they ask to bring them up at certain times, you should be able to have the majority of your laboring and your birthing time with those lights down low, so that it's not quite as overwhelming. And then again, the earpods or having music playing, anything that you can do to create an environment that is less of a sensory assault and more soothing to you is fine. Of course, hospitals have some limitations. They probably don't want candles burning and that kind of thing. But there's a lot that you can do with dim lights, bringing in some sort of a battery-operated twinkle light, having music playing. Those sorts of things are things that you can do to create accommodations for yourself. As we talked about extensively in the last episode, communication with your care providers is going to be critical for you. So you want to talk with your care provider. And I didn't touch on this much in the last episode, even though this is definitely something that happens in pregnancy because it's more related to birth. But I would highly recommend that you work on creating a birth plan. I have an entire birth plan kit where you can download my templates, and then I've got like 3 short videos that walk you through step by step exactly how to do the birth plan. I'm also available if you want more help working on your birth plan. We can work on that together. Just reach out to me and let me know that's what you want to work on, Kristen at naturalbirthandbabycare.com. But having a birth plan is a great tool during pregnancy, number one, because when you're creating the birth plan, and again, my template's going to walk you through this step by step, taking the time to work through the template. I give you pages in there that present all the options to you, so to speak. And you get the chance to research those and to look into those. Or if you want me to come alongside you and guide you through those as a pregnancy coach, reach out to me, birthbabylife.com/beautiful, and we can book a call to talk about what that support would look like. But I'm going to help you go through everything on that sheet, and you get to consider all the options. You get to consider the interventions and those sorts of things. When are they needed? When might not they be needed? What do you really want? And then you get to create your birth plan having done that research, so you feel good about that research and you feel well informed. That is number one, something that's going to help. Like I talked about on the last episode, having structured ways to work through all of these pregnancy and birth decisions can be really helpful for moms on the spectrum, because sometimes checklists are helpful. Sometimes executive functioning skills need work or guidance or scaffolding, so to speak. You know, a scaffold is something that holds things up while they're working on a building. And sometimes we as neurodiverse moms need some scaffolding. And that scaffolding may be something as simple as a checklist, or it may be another person who helps guide us step by step. But that scaffolding will help you to make all of these decisions, and they reduce the overwhelm, because you can take some days or even weeks to work on your birth plan and get that in place. I recommend that you start looking at it at least kind of midway through pregnancy, start considering these things. And like I said before, and I'll come back to this in just a minute, I want you to start considering where you think you're going to give birth right off the bat. But the birth plan itself, you don't necessarily have to think about that super early, but what I do want is for you to have time for that birth plan to be a tool that allows you to dialogue with your care provider. So if you get the birth plan ready, start doing the research mid-pregnancy, middle of your second trimester, early in your third trimester, that gives you that chance to do the research, and then you bring that as a tool to conversations with your care provider. And you can talk with them about things, get their feedback, and sometimes just having that written form in front of you helps you with that verbal communication that may otherwise be difficult. So that is a good thing to talk about. And that also helps you dialogue with your care provider. For example, if you work better with written information, then you can let your care provider know that, and maybe they can help with handouts. One of the projects that I'm working on right now for my clients is just creating an extensive inventory of handouts covering just about every pregnancy and birth topic under the sun, because I know that some women do better when they have the chance to read the written information and perhaps do research, but some moms just want to read the information, be able to think about it, and then they're ready to communicate about it verbally. And I want to be accessible to every mom that I work with. So that's one of the things that I have. And I know that many midwives and some doctors also have worked on having written information as well. So that might be something that you can request. And your birth plan is certainly in a written format that allows you to have that dialogue with your care provider. And then again, like we talked about, having a support person with you, like your doula, like your partner or husband, having someone to help you, like a pregnancy coach who can help you practice dialogues. For example, if you know you want to talk about a difficult thing. Now, when you're in your birthing time, this is why I think it's good to have established a good, clear communication foundation with your care provider throughout pregnancy, because in your birthing time, hormones change the priority and focus of your brain. You're not so much in your analytical brain, and that might be really weird for you as an autistic woman or a neurodivergent woman, because you may feel like you spend all of your time in your analytical brain, and you may be like, what does even intuition mean? And that's one of the things I work with my clients on too, because even neurotypical moms can struggle with tapping into that intuition. But definitely during your birthing time, hormones are what are in control. And the hormones that are in control, for example, oxytocin, beta endorphin are the big ones, though adrenaline, all of those hormones have a place to play in your birthing time. But particularly oxytocin and beta endorphin in an unmedicated birthing time are going to have a powerful effect on your brain, and they take you to a place that is different than your analytical brain. And that can seem scary, but when you're in that place, it's not necessarily scary. But I think what you want to have is to know that there's some grounding outside of that, and you want to understand the process. If you really want to do a deep dive in the hormones, reach out to me, and I'm happy to talk about those things with you. But having that grounding, knowing that your birth partner or your doula is there to advocate for you, because they're going to be more in that analytical brain. And when you've done the analysis before you get to birth, and when you've built up the communication with your care provider, when you and your partner are on board, that's another thing that I work with clients a lot about, is how do I get on board with my birth partner? When you and your doula have talked through these things, these decisions are already made, and you've probably even considered. I was working with a mom the other day who's planning a VBAC at home, and her baby's really big, and she was just really anxious. And so I talked to her about, well, let's sit down and think through what could be the possible outcome of each scenario, each choice, and how would you feel in that? What would happen inside of you in that? And so having somebody take you through that guided work can help you so that when you're in your birthing time, you don't need to think about all those things. You've already thought about that. You've considered feelings. And so you can be much more at peace, and you can also feel more comfortable with that letting go of being in that place, that kind of birthing headspace. And lots of women talk about this. You read about it in many, many, many accounts of birth. So that's one of the reasons why it's important to work on self-advocacy and communication during pregnancy. In your birthing time, you're not going to be reduced to an idiot or anything, but you're just not in that place where analytical decisions are easy, and you don't want to be, because if somebody pulls you into your head and out of that birthing space, then it could interrupt the flow of labor, which is probably what you don't want. So take time during pregnancy to think through these things, to have these conversations, to go through the birth plan, to think about what you want, what you don't want, what you would do if something arose, and how you might feel and how you would like to handle it. And then you're just able to much more smoothly get in that place during your birthing time. And then again, I also think that it's great to have a person there who's able to advocate for you. But even having your birthing plan on hand during your birthing time, during labor, you can point to that and look at that and reference that, and hopefully then get back to the business of birthing your baby without having to do a lot. And again, this is a place to think about, do I want to disclose to my care provider or not? Because disclosure may possibly be helpful for you in getting accommodations and having them understand that you may need a minute to process what was verbally said. And that's something I often need time for, is to sit down and think about what just happened and how do I feel about it? Like, how is this impacting me? Because sometimes that's difficult. Like I was upset recently, and it took me some time to sit down and think about, okay, I'm upset, but really to feel like, okay, I feel angry about this situation, and this is why I feel angry, and this is how I want to communicate that I feel angry. And I had to take time to think about that. And it seems like maybe this is something that should be more intuitive to other people, but it's not to me. And so that might be something is just getting comfortable requesting the space that you need. And that's a good thing to ask for in birth anyways, regardless of where you are on the spectrum or not, is if you feel like things are being steamrolled along and things are being proposed that you're not comfortable with, say, I need to wait. If this is truly life-threatening, that's one thing, but most of the time you can ask, is it okay if we take a few minutes to talk about this, and have that period to wait? And usually it is okay to take a few minutes to slow down, to wait, to consider the pros, to consider the true cons, which often aren't presented to you in your birthing time. And just to have that moment to breathe, to integrate, to think, what do I want? What am I feeling? To go back and say, okay, we did talk about this during pregnancy. If this happened, and this is, maybe now this is happening, and this is what we thought about how we would handle it, or how I would handle it. So again, these are all these are all things to think through and work through in pregnancy that come back and really help you during birth. And then also, again, I've mentioned it a number of times. I'm just making sure I get everything on my notes. Definitely create that supportive birth team, because those people are going to be there with you, kind of helping cheerlead and keep your birth plan on track and that sort of thing during your birthing time. And I touched on this a little bit already, but again, that creating a comfortable birthing environment. And this is a good time to really talk about, okay, what kind of birthing environment do I want to have? And this is something I encourage you to start thinking about shortly after your positive pregnancy test, if possible. But you can think about this anytime in pregnancy, because you can change your plans at any time during pregnancy. So when you think about some of the challenges and what you want, you may want to consider the differences in places of birth. For example, hospitals are very protocol bound, very routine bound, very bright, noisy, systematic, impersonal kind of places. It doesn't mean you can't have a great natural birth in the hospital. I've had many clients who have had wonderful birth experiences in the hospital. But it can be more difficult, and it can be more difficult to get accommodation, because even though they run on routines and protocols, they're their routines and protocols, not necessarily yours. And again, there's a lot you can do to create accommodation for yourself and to have that good experience. But you're fighting a bit of an uphill battle out of the box. And that's true for every mom, but it may be especially pronounced if you have more trouble asserting yourself, if you need to have that sense of being in control of things. And so in that case, you may be open to looking at a birth center. Some hospitals have a birth center attached. They still have hospital protocols, but they're a little bit more open to things. And then a freestanding birth center, which would be kind of like a home away from home environment, or in your own home, where of course you're in control of pretty much everything. So some things to really think about are, how important are mobility to me? How important is it to me to be able to control the environment, the lights, the sound, the music, the smells, the noises, those kinds of things? And then how important to me is it to have a provider who really understands me and knows me and can work with me and all of my quirks? That's what I always like to say, my positive word, all of my quirks and nuances and that sort of thing. And if you really want that higher level of control, customization, intimacy, in the sense that your care provider really knows you and your proclivities and wants and idiosyncrasies and that kind of thing, then a home birth or a birth center birth may be what you want to look at. Now, of course, weighing in there, and I don't have time to go into that on this episode, but I will link to some other episodes. Of course, going into that is considerations of safety and making a decision as to what you feel is safe for you and your baby. So I want you to consider that as well. But talking particularly about the intensity of the sensory experiences and the communication challenges and that sort of thing. And I'm biased because I chose to have my babies at home, and I've trained as a home birth midwife, I'm a home birth birthing assistant, so I'm biased. But I do work with, as my pregnancy coaching clients, I work with moms giving birth literally in hospitals all over the world, and homes all over the world, and all kinds of places all over the world. Women are giving birth to babies. So I have helped a lot of moms to have good outcomes in these places, but I think that a good consideration for a mom on the spectrum is, would a home birth be easier to customize to your unique needs during your birthing time? And the reason to think about that right now is because, as I talked about last week, it is really critical when you're picking your care provider. And again, you can change care providers even at the 11th hour. Midwives have women transfer into their care at 39 weeks. But I really think that it's best to be prepared for the birth that you're choosing. So I encourage women to think about this early, to research care providers early, but just know that your place of birth is probably going to impact your care provider. Now let's talk about creating a comfortable place of birth. I touched on this a little bit, but you can do things that help modify the environment. Even at the hospital or at home, you may want to make some modifications as well. So I touched on some things like the lighting and sound, but also having comfort objects around you, having textures that are calming, especially if you're somebody who, when I was little, one of the things that I remember when I was little is I had this baby blanket and it had a satin border around the edge. And my parents said that when I was little, I would rub that in my fingers to the point where I still have the baby blanket, but it doesn't have a border on it anymore. I rubbed that entire border off because I just did this with it consistently. So if you're somebody for whom textures or rubbing like that is comforting, or feeling textures on your face or certain amounts of pressure like a weighted blanket, that may be helpful. Now, when you're in the very active stages of birthing, those things may go by the wayside because you're going to probably be mobile, moving, doing all of those kinds of things. But in the earlier stages of labor, or if something has been difficult and you've had a couple of contractions that have been really intense, sometimes having that chance to calm down between them can be helpful. Another tool that could be good to have is a birth ball. I recommend a birth ball for every single pregnant woman, at least to have it around, because it can create a large amount of mobility in a small space. But the birth ball may be helpful because you could bounce on it or you could rock on it. Otherwise, do things like stimming type things that help to soothe you between contractions. And then figuring out what helps you during contractions. Women who have freedom of movement and mobility and who are breathing and working well with their birthing times tend to choose kind of repetitive movement during their contractions anyways, such as rocking back and forth with the contraction, low moans, spiraling their hips. These are almost instinctive things that we see women use. And so those are things that may feel very natural to you as an autistic or neurodivergent pregnant woman, because they're kind of stimming behaviors, but at the same time, they greatly facilitate birth because they help create mobility in your pelvis that creates room for baby to come down and out. So just thinking about how you can have these tools or create your environment. A low counter is another thing that I recommend for moms because it's easy to rock or to spiral your hips while the counter holds your weight. A birth partner can also hold your weight for the same thing. And like that, that birth ball and these other tools and things that can be helpful to have around during your birthing time, both for soothing and to help enhance just what's going on with your body already. And then, asking for accommodations like having the dim lights or having an area that's quiet. Like, if I'm in the bathroom, please leave me alone. Wait for me to come out. So asking staff to respect that. Asking for, and this isn't as much of a problem in many hospitals because usually staff are on for 12-hour shifts, but asking for less frequent staffing changes can help make things less overwhelming for you and just create a quieter and calmer environment. And even if you're birthing at home or at the birthing center, think about all these things too. What might you want nearby? What tools do you want? How can you create an environment that during all of the sensory changes of your birthing time is going to be a soothing environment for you? Let's talk some about just how do you cope with sensory overwhelm and stress and that sort of thing, especially if you're in a busy hospital environment. So you can use any of the techniques that we talked about before that are going to be helpful to you. And again, these are things that are good to practice during pregnancy. One thing that may help you or may not resonate with you is to consider a birth hypnosis, just because I think that the conditioning throughout pregnancy is where the strength of those is. I can link below to my HypnoBabies review, and this is something I recommend to clients who are feeling especially anxious or who are on the spectrum. So when we're working together, I might recommend that she go through the HypnoBabies scripts and of course the HypnoBabies book. I love Carrie and the work that she does. One thing that she says is she prefers that you don't combine HypnoBabies with other birthing methods because of her focus on looking at a painless experience, and I definitely respect that perspective from her. I have a different perspective, and when I work with clients, we, especially again, because I'm on the spectrum and I tend to be blunt and frank about things, and very practical, even while I do honor the very spiritual rite of passage aspect of birthing. But having said that, so even though I have a disagreement with her on combining things, I do think that using HypnoBabies scripts can be, and I recommend HypnoBabies because it's what I have personal experience with. I have used it personally in many of my pregnancies, and I have used the labor scripts in a couple of labors, not often, but the everyday conditioning that I got from doing the pregnancy scripts was something that was really helpful for me to be able to manage overwhelm during my birthing time. And I was having all my babies at home, and there were still moments where there felt like there was overwhelm. So I mentioned that simply because that can be a tool. And then any other kind of mindfulness, prayer, awareness technique that you practice throughout your pregnancy may be helpful if you feel overwhelmed. And then the things that we talked about, like having that place, perhaps it's the bathroom, of saying, if I go in the bathroom, please just let me be. And then having somebody there who is kind of your guardian. That's a good place for your birth partner to be, because men like to be protectors. So having that place of, he's the one who says, you know what, she needs a minute, let's give her a minute, and kind of standing guard at the cave, so to speak, for you, can be really helpful. I just think that it is critically important for any mom preparing for a natural birth to really prepare for birth and your birthing time. And I think it's especially critical if you're an autistic woman, and going through learning breathing techniques, learning about movement, learning about relaxation throughout pregnancy, working with your body, because you may not feel comfortable in your body. And this is one of the reasons why I really think that pregnancy and birth helped me, because I went from being very uncomfortable in my body, very uncomfortable being a woman, having a woman's body, and just not really jiving with that, to doing all the work to prepare for birth, which involved learning about breathing. It involved observing tension and relaxation in my body. And just especially across the course of 8 pregnancies and births, it fostered a much greater appreciation for and connection to my body. And so even though I still sometimes have trouble integrating feelings and I need a minute to think about things, I feel fairly comfortable in my body and even greatly appreciative and thankful to God for my body. And that came because of careful preparation for birthing. And I think that it's so critical because, again, it does help you figure out how to integrate and get in tune with your body. And when things feel overwhelming in your birthing time, either because of external things going on with staff and environment, or because of, the feelings and sensations that you're experiencing during labor and just the intensity of those feelings, when you've done that work in pregnancy, those sorts of things come back to you and you're able to get on track. You're able to use breathing techniques. You're able to use movement, especially during the second stage, pushing, which a lot of moms find pushing to be a great relief. I don't know if this is because I was neurotypical or not, but I have never found pushing to be a great relief, other than knowing, especially with my last few babies, okay, this means that we're almost done. But I found pushing to feel more overwhelming. So for me, having those techniques and understanding my body and learning cue words and those sorts of things to help foster softening is a word I like much better than relaxation in your birthing time. But to foster softening is an important skill and something that helps in a very practical way during otherwise intense sensations, because you've conditioned and worked with your body and you know your body much better, hopefully have a greater appreciation for the wonder of your body, and can bring your baby down and out because you're able to support yourself during those admittedly sometimes very overwhelming situations. And then also preparing just for unexpected change, because you may feel like you're in a rhythm and a groove and then something changes. Either labor moves on to another stage like transition, or they come in and they're like, oh, this, that, and the other. So that's another place where really doing your research prenatally and then dialoguing with your care provider and thinking through, how would I react? How do I handle this situation? So you've already got that stuff, that mental work and that analytical work done, and that can help you handle those unexpected changes and things that come up. So let's say that we've moved through kind of the sensory challenges, communication challenges, just the challenges that can come with the physical sensations of your birthing time and preparing for that. And I know I'm giving this only cursory coverage. And like I said, if you want to talk about your specific situation, go to birthbabylife.com/beautiful and book a call. We'll talk about that. I'll also have a lot of resources in the show notes, because this is what I do every day as I teach about getting ready for birthing. So I've got a lot of resources that go into more detail on this. But let's talk too about the immediate postpartum period, because you're transitioning, your baby is out and hopefully skin to skin on your chest. And then there's still the placenta that needs to be born. And there's a lot of hustle and bustle at this point in the hospital. Not so much hustle and bustle in a home birth situation, though there is going to be a much a heightened activity level, even in the home birth situation, because your midwife she's been alert and watching things overall. But, and even if you're having a free birth, but the baby's here, so all of a sudden there's a lot of attention on the baby, looking at the baby, how is the baby doing, monitoring the baby, and then there's also going to be attention on you because the placenta needs to come, and what's going on? Does everything seem to be right with that? So there's definitely a lot of heightened attention at this point going on, and you may be able to perceive or feel that change in the room. So there may be a lot of movement going on, a lot of people moving, there may be unfamiliar sounds, baby may be crying. Most moms, I touched on this in the last episode, but most moms, this includes autistic mothers, feel that baby is kind of an extension of themselves. And when you hear the baby cry, that is often not overwhelming. Baby crying can be overwhelming later, and we're definitely going to touch on that in the next episode. But usually this particular newborn crying doesn't feel as overwhelming, but just know, baby may cry. And so you're going to have baby crying, and people are going to be looking everywhere, and people may be offering congratulations and happy noises, or there may be more of a sense of tension in the area if baby is a little slower to start. So these are all good conversations to have before pregnancy with your care provider. What does it look like if it's been a normal, uncomplicated birth? What happens if baby maybe needs a few breaths to keep going? What would happen? Having all of those discussions, those what-if discussions, can help ease your mind and help you handle the transition. I think it's really, really interesting to look at. I've been doing some research lately on PTSD that nurses and midwives get when they're assisting birthing women. And most of that comes because they perceive, that the woman is really struggling and she's not happy. And then I listen to accounts, like I did the breech workshop a few weeks ago now, with Kristen, who's a midwife who's just worked. She works with Doctors Without Borders. She works in all kinds of situations, and she works with moms who have births that other midwives may not take on. For example, moms with higher order multiples and that sort of thing. And listening to some of the moms where she has had to do incredible things like go in and turn in a multiples birth, go in and turn a baby and bring the baby out. If it's, this, I think in this case it was the third baby coming out. And listening to the mom just talk about how it was a great experience and how it was calm. And then, the interviewer's asking her, how could it have been like that? Because look at what she did. And she said, because beforehand we talked about all of the different scenarios and everything that might have happened and what might need to be done. And so when she told me in the moment, we talked about this may be a possibility before birth, and I'm going to need to go in and find baby's feet and bring baby down. It was part of it. And she's like, it was uncomfortable, but it was nothing as traumatic as a prior birth that this mom had had in the hospital. So I think that really points to the fact that when you do this preparation prenatally for anything that may happen in birth or anything that may happen in this postpartum, and that's where it's great to have a midwife or to have a pregnancy coach, even if you're using an OB. Many of my clients are using an OB, but they want somebody who's going to be there to walk them through all of these things that perhaps the OB doesn't have the time or the inclination to walk through. It feels a lot less overwhelming, and it's really helpful. So finding out not just what can happen in the birthing time, but also in that immediate postpartum period, how do we help baby? How do we check on baby? Helps make that flurry of activity a lot less overwhelming. Again, the research on breastfeeding in neurodivergent moms there's not a ton of research, period, but there is promising research coming out for moms on the spectrum during pregnancy or with mothering. There's not as much, particularly on the breastfeeding relationship, but the research that there is seems to show that autistic moms tend to do well with breastfeeding their babies. Some autistic moms find that it is a sensory trigger, and it definitely feels interesting. I can still remember my reaction, and my oldest is in her early 20s now. I can still remember my reaction the first time that she latched on, and it was like, whoa, what is that feeling? It was just very weird. So knowing that it may feel weird, and then also understanding within, having a book knowledge of what is normal and what is not, because that'll help you in those early postpartum days to seek support from a lactation consultant or a breastfeeding counselor if you need to. But just knowing, baby's going to be skin to skin, baby's going to nurse, and knowing that most autistic moms are able to integrate that well, again, because they see baby as a part of themselves, as an extension of themselves. And then eventually mother and baby individuate as baby grows. But certainly in those early months, they call it the fourth trimester for a reason. really baby is part of you. And skin to skin is beneficial for baby. One of the things that the breastfeeding research showed that really helped moms integrate the sensations of breastfeeding was just because the moms had an understanding, an intellectual understanding of how important and beneficial breastfeeding is for babies. And so they were able to work through breastfeeding challenges to the point where they felt really comfortable with the breastfeeding relationship. So understanding intellectually how important and beneficial skin to skin is for your baby, from everything from the preterm baby to the full-term baby, skin to skin is very good. Skin to skin helps regulate baby's temperature, baby's respirations or breathing. It helps to regulate baby's blood glucose levels. And skin to skin helps your body to regulate as well, creating a safer postpartum. So just doing the research and knowing all of these things can help you integrate the sensations, and just also knowing that just as it's normal for autistic moms to feel overwhelmed in these situations, most moms feel overwhelmed because you've just given birth, which is a huge thing. And then there's this brand new baby who's been living and growing inside of you, and you're finally meeting this person. And it often just feels really, really natural. I shared on the last episode that sometimes I have trouble with making eye contact, and I'll kind of look off to the side or look around for a minute and then kind of check back in with the person that I'm talking to here and there. But I tend to not make steady eye contact. But with my babies, man, I could sit and look at that baby for so long. And when that baby's eyes met mine, there was definitely something that felt magical and right about that. And I think it's because there's just that powerful mother-baby connection. I mean, all throughout pregnancy, your brain is being re-sculpted. We know that the human brain is very plastic, so your brain is being re-sculpted to focus on and treasure and adore and want to be with and nurture this little baby. So those sorts of things are things that can be helpful. And then also remembering that it's okay if something is a struggle. For example, after my third baby's birth, I think it was because I was exhausted. I had been up late a couple of nights before, and then I went into labor and labored all night long. Had him at dawn, beautiful birth. But I was just exhausted, and I just couldn't deal with like the touch, and I was hot, and so my midwives swaddled him up, which they wouldn't normally do. They put a fan on me and tucked him into my arm, and he and I both fell asleep for a little bit. And then when we both woke up, I was able to unwrap him, put him skin to skin. I felt much better, much more grounded. So it's okay sometimes if you've got some sensory needs that are overwhelming, and to take some time to work on things. But I found that was the only birth that I really needed to do that. All the others, it felt very natural being skin to skin with. So just be aware of those things. And then also, this is good for every mom, but especially after the birth, there's often that hustle and bustle for quite a bit after. Home birth midwives will try, after they've made sure that everybody is stable and good, they want to close the door and give you and baby and daddy time to bond. They'll check in with you. They're there if you holler for them, but they want to give you some quiet time to decompress and to know the baby. In the hospital, I think they're a little less inclined to do that as quickly, but eventually it will come. And asking just for that quiet, telling people they cannot come right away is very good. And I didn't touch on this as much, but this is a good place to mention. You get to decide who's in the birthing room with you no matter where you're giving birth. If you're giving birth at home, that is not a free pass for, Aunt Esmeralda and Uncle Denny and the whole gang to be out camping the living room while you're having the baby in the den. You do not have to have your mom there or your mother-in-law there or anybody there that you don't want to have. And I say that having gone through difficult decisions not to have my mom there. And I say that as a mother thinking, what if my daughters don't want me there? But also recognizing that this is your sovereign space and place, and you get to decide. And the same is true postpartum. Just don't invite everybody there postpartum right away, even if they all want to come visit you, because you need time to bond with your baby. You need time to think about the birth, to decompress, to calm down, and to have that quiet. So asking for that can be really helpful. And then again, just thinking all throughout this time, how can I advocate for myself? How can I advocate for my baby? How can I learn? What supports can I have in place? That might be intellectual learning. It might be a birthing course like Mama Baby Birthing. It might be having a doula. It might be choosing a home birth midwife. It might be working with a pregnancy coach. like me. It may be, I don't know what I need, Kristen. I feel so overwhelmed. And then please do reach out to me and I will sit down with you on a call and we will go through, I'll listen to you and we'll talk about, okay, what could be some next steps that make sense? Like the mom that I mentioned earlier, she and I just chatted for a brief session because she's close to birth and she just got all these things going on in her head, but I was able to bring her some clarity. So sometimes just talking with somebody who can bring you some clarity can be really helpful. I mean, feeling prepared and supported are really the keys that are going to help you, that help any mom with her birthing time, but I feel especially for you. So consider, your quirks, your idiosyncrasies, what things bring you comfort. Also think about what really helps facilitate a good, smooth, natural birth. And trust also, I think, in the experiences of pregnant women who have gone through pregnancy, birth, and breastfeeding before you, and that many of them stated that the biggest troubles that they had were with the environment and dealing with the staff, but not with mothering their babies. A lot of moms have trouble bonding with and connecting with their babies if they have a traumatic birth experience. And that's true for autistic moms, neurodivergent moms, and for moms who are not on the spectrum at all. So going in prepared, learning ways that you can advocate for yourself and how you can feel like you have some control of the situation, feel like you have skills and techniques, both in communication and for actually handling the work of your birthing time. Those things can make a huge difference for you. And again, if you've done this thinking and learning beforehand, and a true emergency does arise because that does happen in birth, you feel like you prepare beforehand, you feel like you're heard and respected. And so it's much less likely that even if a situation occurred where we needed some emergency action in birth, that you will feel traumatized by that, or you'll be able to process it because you will feel like this was an emergency. It was a big, heavy thing. I needed to work through it. But you don't necessarily feel the level of disrespect or violation that other women feel when they feel steamrolled into something. So really understanding yourself, kind of doing that integration like I talked about with your body, doing that work during pregnancy, being prepared, creating your support system, thinking about your environment. These things are key to having a good birth experience for every mom, but I think especially for a mom on the spectrum. So definitely take that time to be prepared. Do that research, do the birthing class, get the support that you need. Reach out to me if you want. So on next week's episode, we are going to talk about breastfeeding and like newborns, that early mothering period. And then we'll finish off the series with more of a general mothering episode. So I look forward to talking to you next week, and I hope that you have a blessed week.